After a night out in Birmingham, on March the 3rd of 2023, former Derby County and Birmingham City soccer player Shaquille McDonald got into an argument with his girlfriend, 29-year-old Amy Beckley. He was reportedly angry and jealous because the woman had spoken to a bouncer, whom she knew from her work as a firefighter. After insulting Beckley, whom he'd been dating for less than 2 months, McDonald was reported to have forced the woman into a taxi while holding her in a headlock. The athlete continued assaulting her during the ride home by slapping, scratching and biting her face. McDonald was captured on CCTV outside the woman's residence, striking her in the face, then thrusting his hand into her neck and smashing her head against a wall. With his hand still clutching onto Beckley's throat, McDonald took her to the pavement and dragged her out of the camera's view and into her home. He continued the assault by throwing the single mother onto their bed and strangling her repeatedly. McDonald only paused when the woman was on the verge of losing consciousness before he resumed choking her. He did this several times and at one point told Beckley, "I'm going to put you to sleep. There's nothing you can do about it." The victim was eventually able to move her legs and get herself and McDonald down on the floor. She then ran through the home and jumped from her 14-foot high top floor balcony. The balcony below broke her fall, and a neighbor who'd been out having a cigarette helped her inside their home. Beckley later posted photos of the significant injuries she'd sustained in the attack and fall, which included 2 fractured elbows, facial cuts and bruises, as well as injuries to her arms and legs. McDonald was arrested after the police were called to the address. He was jailed for 2 years and 8 months in October of 2023 after admitting to actual bodily harm and strangulation. McDonald expressed regret towards his action in court, claiming his mind state had been significantly affected by alcohol. Number 18. Powell Cha. The family of Marta Chmielewka from Kettering, Northamptonshire, asked law enforcement to perform a welfare check in October of 2021 after they'd received suspicious messages from her phone which led them to believe someone else was using the device. Northamptonshire police forced their way into a terraced property where the woman's estranged husband, Powell, was staying. In a bedroom, law enforcement found Marta's body wrapped in a blood-stained duvet. She died after being brutally stabbed at least 32 times, with many of the strikes having been delivered to her neck. Powell was next to her body, also bleeding heavily from 9 knife wounds to his throat, which weren't reported to have been inflicted by Marta. He received medical attention and survived. The Polish couple had moved to the UK in 2017, and Powell was reported to have subjected Marta to domestic abuse. After the woman had ended the relationship, he refused to accept her decision. He stalked, threatened, and was violent towards Marta. On the evening of October the 15th of 2021, the woman, whom sources reported had started rebuilding her life, had spent the evening socializing with friends. CCTV would show Powell intercepting her on Wood Street, where an altercation occurred between them that resulted in Marta dropping to the ground. Powell was shown on the surveillance footage holding the woman in a bear hug while she was unsteady on her feet. He forced her to his home, where he confronted her about forming new relationships. Powell then took a pizza knife and stabbed her to death when she reportedly refused to rekindle their relationship. He remained in the same room with the body for nearly 4 days, with an analysis of his movements indicating that he'd gone out to buy beer before returning to the address. The lead detective on the case commented on the situation for the media, saying that Marta was looking forward to a bright future, which was extinguished by the violent actions of a jealous man. 40-year-old Powell admitted murder in court but denied he'd previously been abusive towards Marta. In September of 2023, he was jailed for life. Number 17. ASA Davidson. Isabel Irish, from Bournemouth, England, started dating ASA Davidson in December of 2019, unaware at the time that she was pregnant with her ex-partner's baby. Once the pregnancy was discovered, Davidson led the woman to believe that he would take care of her, but secretly harbored jealousy that the baby wasn't his own. Irish, who was then in her mid-20s, moved in with Davidson, who reportedly cleaned and cooked for her daily as her pregnancy progressed. Irish noted the first red flag in March of 2020 after a trip to get her 5-month scan. She caught Davidson burning the ultrasound in a bonfire. In the garden, she chose not to confront him, worried of how the stress of an argument would affect her baby. In May of 2020, during an argument, Davidson shoved his 7-month pregnant girlfriend into a wall while screaming that the child wasn't his. Irish fled the house, but Davidson chased after her on his bicycle. He caught up to the woman and trapped her by pushing the bike into her stomach. She managed to break free and tried to run away, but Davidson grabbed her and dragged her across the road. He then repeatedly punched her in the face and kicked her in the abdomen before fleeing. The woman passed out and later regained her senses, experiencing a sharp pain in her stomach. A good Samaritan helped her and called the emergency services. Irish was rushed to the Salisbury District Hospital with a fractured eye socket and bruises on her stomach. She gave birth to her dead child, a boy, in the operation theatre. Irish recovered in the hospital and Davidson was arrested 2 days after the brutal beatdown. In October of 2021, Davidson was jailed for life with a minimum term of 12 years after being found guilty of child destruction and grievous bodily harm with intent at Bournemouth Crown Court. Recounting seeing him in court, Irish stated, "I expected him to look guilty and show remorse, but he was smug. Seeing him again made me feel sick." Number 16. Levi Mason. Englishman Levi Mason was jailed for 4 years at Liverpool Crown Court in October of 2013 after a week-long campaign of torment to which he'd subjected his partner, Jamie Gorman. The couple had only been dating for a few months prior to moving in together in Birkenhead. In July of 2013, while they were at home, Mason reportedly got jealous and very aggressive. He took his partner's phone and refused to give it back. He then mounted Gorman while she was lying on the bed and pinned her down. The man pressed his fingers into her windpipe, restricting her breathing, then pushed a pillow into her face, inducing a state of panic as she struggled for air. Mason also held a lit cigarette close to Gorman's thigh before flicking it at her. The following day, he reportedly behaved as if the assault hadn't happened, and his girlfriend was too terrified to alert law enforcement. Later on in the week, following another argument, Mason once again became jealous and violent. He poked the woman in the arm with a nail file, struck her several times with a broom handle, and again smothered her with a pillow, reportedly laughing through her muffled screams. The man tried to pour the adhesive polyfiller in Gorman's ears and eyes, threatened to mutilate her with acid, and held knives pressed against her face and thighs. Following his arrest, Mason, whom a judge labeled as being insanely jealous, admitted 7 counts of actual bodily harm. Number 15. Aaron Swift. Leading up to December of 2015, Elizabeth Carrigan from Wakefield, England, was in a relationship with 26-year-old Nick Williams while simultaneously having an affair with Aaron Swift, aged 33. In mid-December, Carrigan ended her tryst with the latter, telling him that she wanted to start a family with Williams. Swift subsequently went on the internet and looked up Williams's Bottom Boat Road address. On December the 16th, he was captured on CCTV approaching the property, knocking on the door and being allowed inside. Soon after entering the residence, Swift ambushed Williams with a knife and started stabbing him frantically. He delivered roughly 72 knife strikes, many of which were to Williams's neck, severing his jugular vein. As the victim bled to death, Swift took his cell phone and moved the landline so that he couldn't call for help. The blood-drenched attacker left the home about 40 minutes later and took a secluded footpath back to his car. Swift continued texting 24-year-old Carrigan as if nothing had happened in the murder's wake. Upon arriving home, the woman discovered her boyfriend's body along with blood on the walls, overturned furniture, and their collapsed Christmas tree. Shortly after the emergency services arrived at the scene, Carrigan, who later gave evidence in court, stating that she was in absolute shock and could not think straight, texted Swift, who called her and was reportedly stuttering on the phone. Upon being interviewed by law enforcement, he admitted that he'd killed Williams, but claimed he'd acted in self-defense. Swift said he'd gone to the man's house and confessed the affair to him, at which point Williams attacked him. A judge would tell Swift he'd acted with calculated dishonesty before punctuating, "This was a killing done with intent to kill and with savagery." Swift was convicted of manslaughter, and in the spring of 2016, he was jailed for 9.5 years. Number 14. Lyric Willcoxon. On May the 28th of 2023, law enforcement in Bedford, Indiana, received reports of an assault that had occurred at a local Walmart at 9:23 p.m. Responding officers spoke to a woman who told them she'd been attacked by 23-year-old Lyric Willcoxon. The latter had flown into a fit of jealous rage because the victim had spoken to her boyfriend. It was reported that Willcoxon's boyfriend was the victim's co-worker. Willcoxon threw a bottle of Tums at the other woman, then grabbed her by the hair and repeatedly punched her in the face. The boyfriend intervened and pushed Willcoxon off the victim. When the police spoke to the man at his home, he reported that the victim had done nothing to spark the attack. Lawrence County authorities subsequently detained Willcoxon on a battery charge. Number 13. Abbas Haider al-Khafaji. Prior to February of 2022, the unnamed partner of Sydney man Abbas Haider al-Khafaji had tried to end the relationship on account of the man's possessive, paranoid, and aggressive behavior towards her. The woman would later tell a court that she'd expected explosive repercussions as a consequence of her choosing to end the 7-year relationship. In February, CCTV from a McDonald's in Narrowland showed al-Khafaji in his SUV attempting to mow down his estranged partner as she stood near the restaurant's entrance. The jealous man flattened 2 bollards, shattered glass, and sent tables flying. He then grabbed a knife from his car and started chasing his ex through the restaurant. The terrified woman reportedly accepted that she would be stabbed during the incident and told the restaurant manager, "Lock the doors, he's going to kill me, ring the police." Al-Khafaji cornered her in the kitchen where he waved his arms around and threatened her as she defended herself with a broom. Al-Khafaji fled in the aftermath of the tense standoff and was later arrested. He subsequently pleaded guilty to using an offensive weapon with intent to commit an indictable offense and destroying or damaging property worth between $5,000 and $15,000. In August of 2023, it emerged that in spite of having been given an apprehended violence order, Al-Khafaji continued writing rambling letters to the victim from behind bars. He'd given them to a younger relative to deliver. One of the lines read, "What happened last time I saw you was my chip being hacked or me being tested to see if I would resort to violence." He then asked her to change the AVO to include relationship counseling, lest he end up spending 25 years in this hellhole. The victim feared that the letters meant Al-Khafaji would try to find her upon being released. The man faced up to 12 years in prison, but a sentence in his case hadn't been pronounced as of the fall of 2023. Number 12. Naiman Nassa. In May of 2021, Welsh woman Kaya Price, aged 24, confronted Nima Nassa in the Pill area of Newport over the latter allegedly slapping Price's then-boyfriend. Price, who would later admit to taking cocaine and drinking alcohol prior to the confrontation, struck Nassa in the right side of her head with a hammer. The attack was captured on cell phone footage, with witnesses heard repeatedly screaming, "Stop it!" in the audio. Nassa, who also went by Jade Logan, was left with a gash on her forehead and subsequently needed 14 stitches for her wound. A photo of the victim taken in the hammer attack's wake showed her with a severely swollen face, but CT scans revealed she'd suffered no underlying damage. Nassa claimed that the attack left her struggling with anxiety and fearing for her life. Price was arrested and admitted causing grievous bodily harm and possessing an offensive weapon. She, however, claimed to have acted out of excessive self-defense after having been threatened by Nassa prior to the incident. She was handed a 9-month sentence, suspended for 12 months, and was ordered to pay a £156 victim surcharge. Number 11. Michael Henley. In the summer of 2021, the former partner of Australian man Michael Henley, aged 22, visited his home with their daughter, at which point Henley reportedly saw love bites on the woman's neck. Overcome with jealous fury, the man went out to track down Lewis Bennett, whom he knew had been seeing his ex. Joining Henley in his vengeful quest was his friend, 21-year-old Joshua Sean Rossborough. He was a passenger in his own car, which was driven by Henley. They found Bennett, who was in a pickup truck, with 20-year-old Nicholas Darling as his passenger. After the feuding groups exchanged damage to each other's vehicles, Henley chased after Bennett's pickup truck, speeding through the streets of Morfett Vale. Part of the pursuit was captured on CCTV when the pickup broke down on Flax Mill Road. Henley purposefully drove into it. He rammed the vehicle 6 times, at one point backing into oncoming traffic to give himself a more impactful run-up. The pickup rolled over 3 times and Darling, an expecting father, suffered fatal injuries. Henley then fled the scene of the crash, later abandoning Rossborough's car in a gully and setting it alight off the Southern Expressway at Raynella. Henley surrendered to law enforcement 3 days later after being talked into it by his father. In May of 2023, on the day his murder trial was due to commence, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, as well as leaving the scene of an accident. Henley was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months imprisonment with a non-parole period of 11 years. Number 10. Stephen Meyers.
An argument ensued, and at some point the defendant shot the victim multiple times. He's going to be held no bond. The court finds probable cause for the murder in the second degree with a weapon.
42-year-old Stephen Meyers murdered his 21-year-old niece-in-law, Winnie Mendoza, at her Florida residence on July the 29th of 2019 after a secret 2-year affair. On the night of the attack, Meyers had allegedly followed the young woman home and, after parking in her driveway, angrily demanded to know where she'd been. The argument escalated, and the man eventually pulled out a gun, which he used to shoot Mendoza multiple times, killing her instantly. Meyers fled the scene and returned home, where he confessed to the murder to his wife, 34-year-old Luisa Amanda Mendoza, the victim's aunt. He turned himself into the authorities later that same evening and willingly gave the police a full statement in which he admitted to shooting Mendoza. Meyers indicated that he'd suspected his lover of seeing another man and murdered her out of sheer jealousy. He was held in custody without bail on a charge of second-degree murder. Number 9. Unieski Carey Herrera. On November the 17th of 2020, Brazilian dancer Igor Ara de Souza murdered his partner, 39-year-old Unieski Carey Herrera, at their Miami condo. Carey Herrera, also known by the stage name Uni Carey, was the 36th transgender woman to be murdered in the United States during the year 2020. Ara de Souza, aged 27 at the time, had gotten a tattoo of Carey Herrera's name on his hip only a month before the murder. While under the influence of illicit substances, Ara de Souza got into a heated argument with his partner, and after being told she'd found a better man, grabbed a knife and fork from the kitchen and stabbed her to death. Ara D'Souza called 911 and immediately confessed to the jealousy-fueled killing, telling officers he'd ruined his life and deserved to be punished. He was arrested and held without bond on a charge of second-degree murder. A trial hearing was scheduled to take place in early 2023. Number 8. Lindsay Erin Collins. Lindsay Erin Collins, age 25, was shot by a sheriff's deputy in Kissimmee, Florida, after breaking into her ex-boyfriend's apartment and threatening both him and his roommate with a knife on September the 26th of 2018. She'd reportedly sent her former partner, 36-year-old Christopher Ingram, several threatening texts on the night prior to the attack, accusing him of dating another woman and stating, "I will hunt you all down. I will kill her, take her life and mine. You can watch. I don't care." After a brief altercation with the young woman, Ingram and his roommate, Kenneth Musselman, managed to flee the house and call 911. Deputy Lance Turley arrived at the scene a short time later and started to interview the victims, at which point Collins began running towards them holding a knife threateningly. Turley shot at the suspect, hitting her in the chest. Emergency services were immediately called to the house, and Collins was rushed to the hospital. After being stabilized, she was charged with 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, armed burglary, criminal mischief, and aggravated assault. Turley was suspended from the force with pay pending an internal investigation into the shooting. Number 7. Jennifer Sessler. 46-year-old Jennifer Sessler was accused of destroying her ex-boyfriend's car in a fit of jealousy on August 10th of 2022 in Coral Springs, Florida. Both of the vehicle's taillights were busted, and the paint was severely scratched with the word "whore" etched on the side. The victim, whose real name wasn't released to the media, reported the incident to the authorities, stating that he suspected Sessler to have been behind the vandalism. The two of them had recently broken up after dating for 3 years. Sessler had reacted angrily to a picture the victim had posted on his Facebook page with a new girlfriend. When police interviewed the suspect, she denied the accusation, claiming she'd been in Tallahassee at the time of the incident. However, she was arrested after detectives discovered surveillance footage that placed her at the scene of the crime, and she consequently faced a charge of criminal mischief. Number 6. Audrey Stevenson. Scottish woman Audrey Stevenson attacked her friend, Veronica Bannon, during her wedding reception in Linlithgow on July the 28th of 2017. The bride accused Bannon of flirting with her new husband, Scott Allen. Following a brief argument, 46-year-old Stevenson grabbed Bannon's hair and smashed her head into a door, knocking out 2 of her teeth. The couple were arrested at the scene and consequently missed their flight to Mexico, where they'd planned to spend their honeymoon. 55-year-old Allen denied any involvement in the attack, telling authorities he'd been surprised by his wife's actions. He was released after the prosecution accepted his not guilty plea. Although Stevenson initially claimed that she hadn't assaulted Bannon, she eventually agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. She was fined $450 and ordered to pay an additional compensation of $400 to cover the victim's cosmetic procedures. Number 5. Tasha Stran. Tasha Stran, a resident of Torrington, Connecticut, stabbed her live-in boyfriend David Vasquez to death on February the 9th of 2014. 25-year-old Vasquez had attempted to break up with Stran, informing her that he was planning to get back with an ex. An autopsy revealed that the victim died from a stab wound to the heart which punctured his aorta. Detectives discovered text messages Vasquez had exchanged with his ex-girlfriend in which he told the unnamed woman that he was scared of breaking up with Stran. She had allegedly threatened to murder him and harm herself if he ended their relationship. Stran, who was 24 at the time, called 911 after the attack, claiming to have accidentally injured her boyfriend. When police arrived at the scene, they found the young woman attempting to perform CPR on Vasquez. Detectives interviewed several witnesses who'd been at the residence at the time of the murder. According to testimony collected by officers, Stran had told Vasquez, "If I can't have you, no one can," prior to attacking him. Although the general consensus among witnesses was that the stabbing had been intentional, inconsistencies in their statements delayed Stran's arrest. In 2018, she pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years behind bars, followed by 5 years probation. Number 4. Fatima Fus. British woman Fatima Fus of Bradford, West Yorkshire, violently attacked her boyfriend, Meyers, in April of 2016 after suspecting him of being unfaithful. 29-year-old Fus had become enraged after noticing that Raza had gotten a shave and a haircut. She reportedly believed the grooming to be proof that he was seeing another woman. She called him repeatedly throughout the day in question, leaving threatening messages and even trashed his apartment while he was at work. The couple began arguing upon Raza's return home. At one point, Fus lunged at her boyfriend, aiming a kitchen knife in the direction of his chest. Raza stepped aside and the knife instead landed in his arm with such force that the handle broke off. Fus attempted to grab a second knife, but the victim managed to flee the scene and contact the authorities before the violence could continue. Fus was arrested but denied each of the charges levied against her. Much to her surprise, Raza supported her claims of innocence while testifying, stating that the stabbing had been an accident. Fus was ultimately found guilty anyway and was consequently sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Number 3. Gabrielle Nunes. 21-year-old Florida resident Gabrielle Nunes lashed out in violence against the father of her child after answering a phone call from his girlfriend in July of 2019. The man, who hasn't been named, had reportedly been intimate with Nunes earlier on the evening in question and had fallen asleep next to her in bed. When the victim's phone rang, Nunes answered it and was confronted by his girlfriend, who asked what she was doing in his apartment. Nunes woke the man up and began arguing with him as she placed their child in a stroller. She then grabbed a knife and lunged at him. He retreated into the bathroom and locked himself inside while Nunes repeatedly stabbed the door and shouted at him from the other side. She eventually managed to gain access to the bathroom but was disarmed by the victim and restrained on the floor until police arrived at the scene. She was arrested and charged with attempted murder and aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Today's topic was requested by Destiny Montague UX 6561, Miss Lil Peach, and Nikki 123BXD. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. James Michael Watson. On October the 30th of 2017, James Michael Watson viciously beat up his girlfriend's dog named Brooklyn in Salisbury, Maryland. Having grown jealous of the attention it received from her, Brooklyn, a bulldog, suffered injuries to her left eye, nose, and the top of her head, but fortunately survived the attack. The dog was treated at Healing Hands Animal Hospital, while Watson was arrested by officers who responded to the scene. He was charged with 2 counts of animal cruelty as well as malicious destruction of property. In October of 2021, Watson was convicted of his charges and consequently sentenced to the Department of Correction for a term of 1 year and 1 day. We will tune up our release about 9 ex-wives who went after the mistress right after number 1. Stick around in case you hadn't seen that one yet. Number 1. Armando Baron. On September the 19th of 2020, 32-year-old Armando Baron lured his wife's lover, Jonathan Amaro, into a lethal trap after discovering evidence of their affair. Baron caught his partner, 33-year-old Brittany, exchanging flirtatious texts with the victim, who was aged 25 at the time. He subsequently posed as his wife and arranged to meet Amaro at Wayside State Park in Rindge, New Hampshire. Upon Amaro's arrival, Baron forced him into a car before gunning him down. The autopsy report revealed the presence of defensive wounds on the victim's arms and hands, indicating there was some sort of physical struggle in the moments before the shooting. According to Brittany's testimony, Baron violently beat her and forced her to drive over 190 miles to a remote campsite while he followed behind in another vehicle. When they got to their destination, he allegedly pressured Brittany into beheading her lover's corpse and disposing of the body. Fish and Game officers discovered the remains several days later. Brittany agreed to testify against her husband and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of falsifying evidence. Baron was ultimately found guilty of 13 counts, including criminal solicitation for murder and assault, kidnapping, and first-degree murder. Presiding Judge Elizabeth Leonard sentenced the culprit to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 to 135 years. Number 9. Frances Hall. 53-year-old Texas woman Frances Hall was sentenced to 2 years in jail for killing her husband Bill after discovering his years-long affair with a woman by the name of Bonnie Contreras. Bill, aged 50, had a history of cheating on Frances throughout their entire marriage, yet she'd reportedly always forgiven him. In 2010, Bill began yet another affair with 34-year-old Contreras and hid it from his wife for 3 years. When Bill allegedly began to lose interest in Contreras in October of 2013, she threatened to tell Frances about their relationship. She started harassing the woman with text messages and even sent explicit photos and videos of her having intimate relations with her husband. A few weeks after Frances had found out about the affair, she kicked Bill out of their home. However, the very next day she saw the man riding his motorcycle down the road, while Contreras followed behind in her car. Frances was angry and later maintained that she wanted to confront Contreras to tell her that she could have her husband, but to leave her and her children out of it. She followed them down the road, but the resulting chain of events ended with Bill fatally crashing his motorcycle. Contreras and Frances had different accounts of what happened in the incident. The former alleged that Frances intentionally sideswiped her husband, causing him to crash, while the latter claimed that it was an accident. She stated that at some point Bill had gotten behind both their cars and that Contreras intentionally braked hard, causing her to do the same, which didn't give Bill enough time to slow down. He wasn't wearing a helmet and suffered massive blunt force trauma to the head. Bill was rushed to the hospital but was unable to recover from his injuries. In September of 2016, Frances was found guilty of murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and was released in September of 2018. Number 7. Monica Forey. In October of 2015, Monica Forey poured boiling water on her husband's 24-year-old lover, Hannah Stokes, burning her head, neck and chest. The affair between Stokes and Wouter Forey had started in the summer of 2015 in Plymouth, England. 34-year-old Monica had begun suspecting her husband was being unfaithful and questioned him about it. He eventually came clean about the affair, which prompted her to leave their home and stay at a friend's house. However, she unexpectedly returned on October the 24th of 2015 to find Wouter sitting on the sofa with Stokes and watching rugby together. Eerily calm, Monica claimed she'd go into the kitchen to make a cup of tea. Moments later, she came back into the living room with a cup of boiling water that she poured on Stokes. Monica then got the entire kettle from the kitchen and emptied it on Stokes after grabbing her by the hair. The former was convicted of causing grievous bodily harm with intent and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Stokes was treated for second-degree burns and had surgery for a punctured eardrum in her right ear, but ultimately lost 25% of her hearing. Number 6. Jang Jun. In June of 2018, Jang Jun was attacked by a furious, unnamed woman with fish sauce and chili after allegedly having an affair with her husband. The scorned spouse showed up to 30-year-old Jun's beauty shop with a group of women and dragged her by her hair into the street. With the help of her companions, the angry woman stripped Jun of her clothes and poured fish sauce all over her body, followed by extra hot chili powder. A witness told the police that the women were screaming curse words at Jun during the assault that left her with serious cuts on her face and neck as well as burns from the chili powder. By the time law enforcement had arrived, the group of women had already fled the scene, leaving Jun in the middle of the street. She was rushed to the hospital where she was treated for her injuries. For the attack, the scorned woman would have faced charges of humiliating another person, intentionally inflicting injury and causing public disorder. Police encouraged Jun to make an official complaint, but she refused to identify her aggressor because she feared the consequences of doing so. Number 5. Kashina Mika. On Valentine's Day 2017 in Miami, Florida, Kashina Mika ran over her husband's mistress, Ashley Weatherspoon, after catching them together. Mordika's 32-year-old husband, Marco Mack, was in a long-time love triangle with both women. When she saw the pair together on the night, she confronted them and a fight broke out between her and Weatherspoon. It culminated with Mordika getting back in her car and plowing into the mistress. Weatherspoon's leg was severed in an instant, but Mordecai kept driving and left the scene. Weatherspoon was rushed to the hospital where she ultimately had her leg amputated. Mordecai was later arrested and charged with attempted second-degree murder and leaving the scene of an accident. Although he hadn't been involved in the attack, Mac was also arrested on outstanding warrants for grand theft and burglary. Number 4. Natalia Crasco. A 28-year-old Russian woman was accused of assaulting her husband's mistress when she showed up to their marital apartment, demanding she leave. Natalia Crasco married 88-year-old Ivan Crasco, a well-known actor, in September of 2015. However, shortly after they tied the knot, Natalia refused to be intimate with Ivan because she was reportedly worried about getting pregnant. Reacting to her decision, the man told Natalia that he wanted a divorce and started seeking out other women. He met 27-year-old Yulia Kichimasova and began having an affair with her behind his spouse's back. Then in September of 2018, Yulia showed up with bags and ready to move into the apartment that Natalia and Ivan shared in Moscow. Ivan wasn't at home when she arrived, but Natalia was, and became enraged when Yulia demanded that she pack her things and leave. As Yulia tried pushing past Natalia to unpack her belongings, the latter allegedly grabbed her by the hair and smashed her head into a table multiple times before punching her. Yulia stated that she would report the incident to the authorities, but no updates were given as to whether or not she followed through on her intention. Yulia was left with a black eye, bleeding lips, and a bleeding nose from the incident. Natalia completely denied the attack, only stating that she'd thrown the mistress and her belongings out of her home, but never assaulted her. Shortly after the scandal, the divorce between Ivan and Natalia was finalized. Just 2 years later, on December the 4th, 90-year-old Ivan had a child with Yulia. Number 3. Anastasia. 44-year-old Anastasia and her husband Anthony had a three-way relationship with a young woman named Jacqueline Riggs. Their arrangement became troublesome after Anthony moved 25-year-old Riggs into the home he shared with Anne in Maryland. Tension began to brew among them within close quarters, causing the married couple to break up. In spite of the separation, Anthony and Riggs continued their relationship and moved into the basement of the house. The decision angered Anne, so she began plotting to kill the couple with the help of her teenage daughter and her daughter's 18-year-old boyfriend, Gabrielle Nunes. Anne was the alleged mastermind behind the plot, manipulating her daughter into planning the killings with her and using Nunes as the hitman. Anne ordered the latter to shoot 40-year-old Anthony and then stab Riggs to death. The teenager did as instructed, and several hours after the murders, Anne called the police. She claimed to have found her husband and Riggs dead, trying to suggest that it had been a murder. However, the police soon discovered that the gun that had killed Anthony didn't match the one that was found next to him. During their investigation, the authorities retrieved text exchanges between Anne and Nunes that discussed the killings. The gunman later pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of both victims and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Anne was also sentenced to 60 years in prison, while her daughter was charged as a juvenile. Number 2. Lauren Gray. 38-year-old Lauren Gray confronted her husband's mistress, Amanda Boylan, in front of a school in Paisley, Scotland, on January the 30th of 2018. It was the first time that Gray and Boylan had seen each other since the former had found out about the affair. Upon seeing the other woman, Gray grabbed her by the hair and punched her in the face, leaving Boylan with a bloody nose. She then got in her car and drove home, where police arrested her later that day. Gray pleaded guilty to the assault and was fined nearly $490. Number 1. Tammy Moa. In 2014, Tammy Moa was accused of kidnapping her husband's mistress, 20-year-old Heather Elvis, who had been missing since December of 2013 in South Carolina. Elvis and Sydney Moa, aged 42, had begun an affair after meeting at a restaurant where the former worked. 46-year-old Tammy had allegedly become jealous of the relationship Sydney had with Elvis. In October of 2013, she started harassing the young woman by calling her incessantly and sending her pictures of her and Sydney being intimate. Elvis was reportedly ready to move on from the relationship. Then on December the 19th of 2013, local police received a call about a suspicious car parked at a secluded boat landing. The vehicle belonged to Elvis. All of her belongings were inside, but the young woman was nowhere to be found. Police investigated Elvis's phone records and found that Sydney had called her from a payphone the night before, saying that he'd left his wife and wanted to see her. Investigators would later determine that it was a trap set by the married couple to lure her to them. Grainy surveillance footage had shown Sydney's black truck driving to and from the same boat landing on the night that Elvis was there, around the same time of her disappearance. In 2014, the couple were charged with murder and kidnapping, but the murder charges were later dropped due to a lack of evidence. In 2017, Sydney's trial for kidnapping resulted in a mistrial because the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Sydney went on to serve a 10-year sentence for obstruction of justice in connection to the case, while Tammy was sentenced to 30 years for kidnapping. Thanks for watching. Would you rather listen to a jealous rant from your partner for 2 hours straight, or have a 5-course dinner with just your mother-in-law? Let us know in the comments section below.